Hello and welcome to Words of the Wild, a podcast brought to you by the Scottish Wildlife Trust. My name is Ed, and as always, I am joined by my brilliant colleague and co-host.
My name is Rachel, and thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about taking action for nature, a phrase you've maybe heard or seen before. And action can take many forms. I think sometimes, we can all feel a little bit overwhelmed or perhaps even a little bit, helpless in the face of the climate crises, that we have going on. But there are roles each of us can play that really do make an impact. So whether, it's putting out a wildflower box in front of your house or talking to your employer about environmental initiatives or even engaging with MSPs about the change we want to see. So in this episode, we're going to be talking to some fantastic people about what they do and how you could get involved as well. And hopefully we can all take a little bit of inspiration away with us. So what's up first, Ed?
So for our first feature, we are going to be rejoined by a couple of members of the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels team. In particular, we're going to be hearing from Tom, who's the data officer for the project, and Tom handles all of the data from across the project and the partnership and all of the fantastic organisations that are involved. And all of that data comes from public sightings and from some of our fantastic volunteers, as well as staff data as well, and supports the team in accessing that data and makes it really, really accessible so that it can be used in the on-the-ground conservation work. We're also going to be hearing from Naomi, who is part of our North East team based up in Aberdeen in the Aberdeenshire area. And Naomi works on the community and the outreach work, making sure that local communities are involved in the work up there in the North East as well. So Tom and Naomi are going to talk a little bit here about just how important public sightings are in informing their on-the-ground conservation work.
My name is Naomi Bentley and I am the Community Coordination and Outreach Officer for the North East Team branch of Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels. So the engagement aspect towards Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels is extremely important. I think anyone on the team would say it was really important, especially from my point of view, because the more people, first of all, that are aware of the project, then the more support that we can gather, the more knowledge in the general public. And two, I think it's good for factual information. I think from what I've done of events and talks, I kind of get a lot of the same questions from the public about the squirrels themselves. And it's good to correct any misinformation that people might have. A lot of people think that the greys and the reds attack each other, or some people think that they interbreed as well, which is quite an interesting thing, because you see the different shades of red squirrels, like the darker ones, the lighter ones. So that aspect of it is super important, because then once people know more, they feel more confident talking about it, and then they want to know more and more after that. So we can hand out the leaflets and direct them to the website, which is another layer of community engagement, because the hub that we have for all the sightings reports is super, super important, because the more people who report a squirrel sighting, the more data we have to feed in to the project, to make maps, to gain the funding. And also it's really just great to just get more people to support the project and realise the purpose of it, the aim of it, to save our native red squirrels. And the more people who understand why we do it, then the more people that will sort of rally behind us and help the project a lot. So some of the key stuff in my role is definitely I go to a lot of events. So it's a lot of community outreach. It's a lot of taking the project to the general public, telling them all about the work we do. So I go to a lot of events. I do talks for different groups. We have people approach us a lot to ask for talks, to talk about the project, to talk about the squirrels. Recently did a walk and talk in Hazelhead Park with the City Council Rangers. So there's a lot of collaborative working as well with, like I said, councils, landowners, other organisations. Also another event coming up with actually Wildlife Watch from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. The kids events that they do, we're going to do a squirrel themed one. So a lot of my role is that side. And then also a massive chunk of my role is overseeing and helping the volunteer network that we have for the North East. And our volunteers do a lot of our feeder box surveys. So we have these squirrel feeder boxes up all around the city, and that's how we monitor which species we have in our area. And a lot of our volunteers go to those feeder boxes, take off the hair sticky sample underneath the lid, send those into me, and that's what I look at under the microscope and then send their results back to them which again feeds into our data. And we can see whether there's been red squirrels in the area, grey squirrels in the area. We also help detect pine martens, whole host of other species as well. So they're the main two chunks of my role, is the community outreach and also the hare ID and looking after our amazing volunteers, of which now we have about 39. There is a good link between being in the field and the community outreach. I also have some of my own surveys that I do, so I get to do my own field work as well, which is super. And when we get new volunteers, I go out and train them up and tell them all about the project and teach them how to do the feeder boxes. Yeah, it's super. A lot of them are on their visits now into the hundreds. So we've got some volunteers that are on, I think the other day I wrote one down that was their visit 112. So a lot of them stay with us for a long time. They just, and they have like a pride as well being part of the project, which is lovely. And then we have like a secure group chat that they'll send videos and photos in when they see their squirrels when they're out and about doing their surveys as well. The public sightings that are inputted to our website, which we call the hub, are super, super important, because I check those every day, because if we've had a grey squirrel sighting, if someone thinks that they've seen a grey squirrel in Aberdeen City or the Shire or Murray, then that I would be the first person to respond to that. So I would reach out to them, see if they've got any further evidence, maybe like a photo or a video, or I'd just call them anyway and just have them speak about and describe what they saw. And then I can also help them sort of determine whether it was a red or a grey. The grey squirrels have the classic characteristic of the white hairs on the outside of their tail, like a halo effect, we call it. That can be really helpful. They're also bigger. It's also tricky though, because there's a lot of variations in colour in red squirrels, and also grey squirrels might have a little bit of red in their coats. But that is super important, because we obviously use our feeder boxes and the hair samples to survey every 2 weeks what's going on around here. But if someone just happens to suspect that they've seen a grey squirrel, that sighting on the hub really helps us, and then we can then further investigate that. So that really, really does help. Anyone who submits a sighting, whether it's red or grey, is super, super helpful. It's just basically more eyes on the ground. We already have, like I said, a wonderful volunteer network, but anyone else who sees a squirrel and submits that feeds into our data again, and also helps us detect any possible greys. So a key thing that I would say about our red squirrel conservation is, of course, use the hub. Please do go to Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels website and record any sightings that you see, be that a red squirrel or a grey squirrel. Like, all of that is super important to underpin our data. I will be the one checking those, so I'll be able to see your sighting. They're all greatly appreciated. And just don't be afraid to log a sighting. Even if you're not sure, please do, because it's always really, really helpful.
I'm Tom. I'm the data officer on the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project. So SSRS has an online community hub. So it's our website where we also store all of our data. So different data streams are available to different users on the hub. If somebody comes in and just wants to record some sightings, then their own sightings, once they've created an account, would be available to them. For our other users, like our staff members, it means they've got that wider level of data, whether it be from any data stream that they're collecting is available to them through the hub, so they can interface with that. And that's kind of part of what the hub is. But really, the hub is, I would call it the community hub, because it's about the whole community. It's about every user who wants to interact with the SSRS project across Scotland being able to do so. And they can do that, through logging sightings, through viewing their own data, through viewing wider squirrel sightings data, through finding ways that they can otherwise interact with the project by getting involved with different volunteering surveys and anything that they might want to get involved with. So once somebody wants to record a squirrel sighting, they'll go through a short form to record all the relevant details that we need from that sighting to make it really useful for us. And then as soon as they hit submit, it goes directly into our sightings database, which has getting towards 200,000 in total across the project. once a sighting is submitted, it will go into our database and marked as a new sighting. And then we have sightings verifiers, including volunteers who have in detailed knowledge of their area and squirrels in their area, or whether our staff. And then they will be able to review those sightings. There is sometimes confusion between red squirrels and grey squirrels. So people who are in the know in the area will follow up and they'll confirm as they think is appropriate to sightings, or if there are any sightings which are unusual, a red squirrel in an area that's not known for red squirrels, or a grey squirrel in an area that's just known for red squirrels. And they will then contact the person who made that sighting, try and get some more information, a little bit more context to it. And yeah, this is really particularly important in areas like the northeast, where we're not expecting there to be any grey squirrels round and about in Aberdeenshire. There's a few left in Aberdeen, but in wide Aberdeenshire, it's concerning if we get a grey squirrel report. So having these come through and having people to follow up on them is really great for then being able to plan whether we need to go in and do something about that to sort of protect the integrity of the recovering red squirrel populations across Aberdeenshire. So it's really great for that. And then once that record is reviewed, if it's confirmed, then it goes in with all the other confirmed data. And once it has been confirmed, actually the public can view it on our sightings page, on a map of all our squirrel sightings from across Scotland. But it also means that we can then use that data as well.
Amazing. Well, as you know, Tom and Naomi mentioned, data collection is such a vital part of the project, and having even more folk on board to record their sightings, clearly goes a really long way. So don't forget, if you spot a squirrel, red or grey, to record it on the Saving Scotland Red Squirrels website. It's super easy to do. Citizen science is such a great way, I think, to get involved in conservation, and obviously, an incredibly important thing with data collection. So yeah, I really encourage people to get out there and see what opportunities are there. If you search online with different levels of commitment. It's also a great way to get children involved as well. So our Aberdeen Wildlife Watch group got involved with the Great Scottish Squirrel Survey with Naomi and the team up in Aberdeen. And it's a really lovely way for kids to kind of get that, I guess, kind of jump start into conservation and science, and do a little bit of recording and learn along the way.
That sounds like loads of fun. And I really like the idea that data and logging sightings and citizen science can all feel quite overwhelming. It can feel quite intense. But I really like this idea that actually you don't have to be a scientist or a really hardcore conservationist to get involved and support the work. You can head over to as we've just said, head over to the Saving Scotland Red Squirrels website, log a sighting, and all that data goes through to the hub and plays a really, really important role in the work of the project.
So Ed, as we've been recording, I have noticed your hoodie and I'm incredibly jealous. For those that obviously can't see, I'm lucky enough that I can. Ed's wearing one of our Words of the Wild branded hoodies, which looks very cozy, Ed, is it?
It's so cozy that I actually haven't taken it off in about 3 days, so it probably needs to go in the wash now, but super, super comfortable. It's a lovely green colour as well, which is one of my favourite colours, which helps. Yes, we do now have official branded Words of the Wild merchandise, which are available to purchase through the Scottish Wildlife Trust online shop. If you head over to the website, you can find all of the links there. They are all sustainably produced and packaged as well, and they are really, really nice quality, so we'd highly recommend. If you're listening to this just at the time of release, it should be out in December, so just in time for Christmas. Great for Christmas presents if you're still doing a bit of Christmas shopping, nice sustainable presents. And all the funds, of course, go to help our conservation work across Scotland. Where are we heading then for our next feature, Rachel?
Yep, so next we're going to chat a little bit about gardening with nature in mind. So obviously gardening is a great way to help your local wildlife. And, you don't even need to have a garden to make a difference. If you've got a windowsill or a doorstep, there's lots of ways we can help our local wildlife. So I headed to Prestwick in Ayrshire to talk all things wildlife gardening with Lynn Bates from our Ayrshire Nectar Networks project, who we met back in season 1, and Jean Lanham, who's a garden designer in Prestwick, running her business called The Good Garden. And Jean is also partner of the Nectar Networks project. So our project basically has like a kind of diverse range of partners, and Jean is one of those partners, meaning she commits to managing her site for the benefit of pollinators, and she also raises awareness of the project with her clients to help kind of increase the connectivity of all our Nectar Network sites, which of course benefits pollinators. So I met up with Lynn and Jean in Jean's fantastic garden to hear some of their tips and tricks when it comes to gardening for nature.
What was it like when you arrived then?
So when I first moved in, this garden was basically an enormous drying green, a lawn area with 6 or 7 sycamore trees around the border. So I decided to try and make it a little bit more wildlife friendly, and also to create seating areas or destinations in the garden where I could sit and watch the wildlife, the birds and the bees. So, and now it's a lot very different to what it was when I first moved in.
But it's not massive, is it? I mean, that's what, when you arrive, you think this is a huge space, but it's actually not. It's not a big space.
No.
But it looks it because of how you've designed it.
Yes.
How you've planted.
It's amazing actually what you can actually put into a smaller garden. Some people may think that you can't put trees into a smaller garden, but actually in here I've got this lovely old pear tree which must have been planted with the house. And so that's the star of the show. I love my old pear tree. Got a couple of birches, a few rowan trees, lots of climbers, pyracantha. So I've tried to create a very dense habitat which is appealing to a wide range of creatures. So I've got sort of higher canopy trees, and then I've got lots of shrubs and lots of ground cover as well, which is quite useful for hedgehogs and I've got frogs. So lots of ground cover where they can, feel safe and hide. And obviously from a habitat point of view, overwintering, I've got a pile of logs here, which is important for beetles and bees to overwinter.
And is that a pond over there?
Yes, I've got a pond over here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's
Might
lovely.
Even, yes, it's important to have, if you want a wildlife pond, it's quite important not to put fish in. That's key. And to have oxygenating plants in there, and before you know it, it's going to be full of frogs and newts and hoverflies, and if there's enough sun you might even get dragonflies. This one, you don't want to put it in a too sunny a position, so it's kind of half and half, otherwise you'll get the algal bloom.
But it's not very deep, isn't it? I mean, you don't want to have a deep pond for wildlife in, and you've got that gradual slope going up there.
Yes, it's important to have that beach so that if any creatures want to come down and drink, like the hedgehogs hopefully, or frogs, they can cut, so they have easy access in and out of the water.
And bees as well.
And bees.
Anything that needs to get a drink, obviously we've got all these heat waves recently, and a little bit of water, you'll see, in fact, you've got stones in there where they'll probably come and sit and be able to easily drink, but also if they do fall in, they can get out.
They can easily clamber out, over the stones.
But this isn't a big pond. I mean, what, probably a couple of meters?
Yes, 2 meters by 1 meter.
Yeah. But you could make even smaller. I mean, I'm just thinking for people who don't have this space.
Yes, I would say that one of the most important things to introduce to a garden, if you're wanting to create a wildlife-friendly garden, is to introduce water. And it could be just a small barrel, tub. Bird baths are useful for the birds, for drinking and for bathing. But they need to be able to drink. The bees, insects, butterflies, all of them birds.
Yeah.
So yes, you don't need to actually build a pond. You can use ready-made containers.
Yeah. So if somebody's got a smaller garden, they could just put, even a bucket size.
Yes.
As long as it's got all the features like you said, so
yes.
they can get out, have
yes.
easy access, but just for drinking, if not even for living in.
Yes. Yeah.
It's lovely.
And looking up, getting the correct plants, oxygenating plants, so it doesn't. It's obviously important to have the water oxygenated.
So it sounds like you actually garden all the time with wildlife, with nature in mind.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Why? Why do you do that, Jean?
I think, gardening for nature is important. I think not only for us as human beings, because we can get we feel connected. We are part of nature, so it's important to feel in tune. I certainly get a lot of pleasure out of sitting and watching the birds and the butterflies and the bees. Look at all the bees on the lavender now.
Look at these.
And the birds, if you leave the seed heads on plants, for instance, this Stipa gigantea, which I mentioned is over the pond, I see the goldfinches actually landing on it in the middle of winter. And it kind of sways with their weight, and it's lovely.
Fantastic.
So gardening for nature is important, but it needn't be complicated. I think that's the important thing. Every garden is essentially a garden which is a biodiverse habitat. Every garden is good for nature, is basically how we manage that garden, which is important. So for instance, leaving the seed heads on your perennials for a little bit longer than normal is going to benefit the birds. You can be a little bit messy as well if you don't have to be tidying up the leaves, the fallen leaves, or if you do want to have a tidier border, then collect the leaves but leave them under a hedge somewhere, or put them in a compost heap in the corner, and all of that does benefit. As little intervention as possible, within reason, obviously. Every gardener has a different idea of how they want their garden to look. So even if you do have a neat and tidy garden, don't worry, it's still going to be useful for birds and bees. What I would say,
you could make it a little bit.
You could.
What I would make it a little bit better by being maybe a little bit untidy in a corner.
A little bit untidy, yes. And if
a little bit in an area.
Yes,
less is more.
Yes, that's true. You could leave a little area of your lawn a little bit longer, and maybe just leave a few weeds in the border. I quite like that philosophy. It's just kind of
weeds are just wildflowers.
Yes, exactly. They are.
Who said a dandelion was a weed? Was it the Victorians?
Yeah. And dandelions are great. You can eat every part of the dandelion, actually.
Yes. And I'm not thinking just about you, Gina, about the pollinators.
Yeah. And actually, what you can do from a garden design perspective is, if you are worried about your garden looking a little bit unruly, you could plant a lovely yew or a box, and if it's a tightly clipped dome right next to a sort of unruly looking hedge or perennial or grass, it kind of starts to it looks more managed. It looks as if the gardener has intervened. So we're not just leaving the whole thing to grow and look crazy messy, a sort of cacophony of colour and structure, and or cacophony of colour and shapes and sizes. So
yeah, that's a great idea, because if I think I'm at the messy end of the scale and the slightly untidy and wilder area, and then obviously that's not everyone's cup of tea, and you've got at the other extreme a very neat and tidy manicured garden, but actually if you have that little bit of wildness in there, but by having that neatly clipped dome of a hedge or a shrub or a slightly longer lawn area, and then a nicely neat cut area, like you framed it, then it's showing that it's a sort of bit of a compromise.
Yes,
but it's
exactly.
But that is going to be fantastic for wildlife.
Yeah. So in my lawn, what you were saying about creating a frame, I've left these areas of white clover. I see lots and lots of bees on the white clover. I've got a little bit of red clover somewhere.
So we're looking at sort of your lawn, which is, I'm saying lawn like that because it's actually got lots of areas of uncut grass where you've got flowers through them, and you've cut various paths around. And again, it's probably only about 6 meters, 5 meters long, not even that, maybe by maybe 3 or 4. But you've cut paths through it, and you've left areas, so you've got this lovely mosaic. So you've got shortcut, and then slightly longer, and then much longer, and that's a really fantastic way to give different habitats for different insects.
Yeah.
So, and I also see you've got apples that you've cut in half.
Yes, for the blackbirds, they absolutely love. Oh, look at those wasps. You see the blackbirds eat the apple, and they leave a lovely neat bowl, and then the wasps and the slugs come in and they eat the rest of it.
So that was a queen wasp, actually. So you see the queen wasps are emerging, the larger one, which are emerging now. And I think, unfortunately, wasps get a bad rap.
Yes, I know, it's a shame because they are important.
They're
nature's
they're
predators.
Pest control, yeah. But I think that's a great way of doing it, is to put, if you want to keep them away from either your plums or your pears, or then just put a bit of fruit somewhere, a little to one bait side. For them. Yeah, and then they can go in there, because that's all the worker wasps that have basically, they finished their job, they finished their work. The new queens have emerged. They're off to mate and find a nest. So the larger ones, we're seeing the queens, but the smaller ones, the workers, they've basically done their job. They've gone out and eaten all our aphids and caterpillars. So they've done all the pest control around our gardens. And they've taken that food back to the nest to feed the young. So that's the protein. So that's great. That's why we don't see them in the summer. But this time of year, we're seeing more of them because they've finished. The queens have emerged. Off they've gone. They've finished their job. And what they want now is carbohydrate.
Right,
they want the sugar, because that's what they don't eat
and that's why they go for our picnics.
So that's why they go for our picnics. So that's why they go for your jam and your honey and your scones and things like that. So because they're a bit like, they haven't got long to live. They're going to be dying in the next few weeks. So, but that's why they bother us. So they have done some great work for us during the summer. So I always say to people,
so there they are.
A little bit of food. So they're not coming bothering you. They're eating their sugary snack you've left out.
Yes, I actually don't feed the birds, I have to say, with bird feeders. What I try and, I don't know if that, I do try and create as much natural food for them in the garden. One of the reasons is because I know that you're supposed to be really meticulous about cleaning the bird feeders, and I just feel I don't have the time. So there's a lot of seeds, there are berries on the rowan tree, berries on the pyracantha. So I do try, I think, and actually black currants, brambles, I do grow those just for the birds. I don't actually pick them.
So is this this looks, we're at the back here, it looks like you've got lots of areas for wildlife to go and either overwinter or get some shelter, and also things like bumblebees, overwintering queen bumblebees, solitary bees, where you've got some bare soil over there.
Yes, where hopefully they can burrow and nest over winter, hibernate.
So do you intentionally keep that area a little bit untouched, a little bit wilder?
I do. There's not a lot of human intervention in the bottom of the garden there. And that's where I do, if I pick up any leaf litter, it just all goes in there. And a lot, I see the blackbirds darting in and out of that hedge, blue tits as well. Planting for wildlife is something. So creating an entire habitat is important. So trying to have plants at all different levels, trees, shrubs, not too many spaces in between shrubs as well, trying to create a network within your garden of green. And what I would say is, if you're trying to plant for pollinators, try and avoid as much as possible the annual bedding plants, just because they're very highly bred. There's not a lot of pollen in them, if at all. And you'll notice that if you've got a sort of hanging basket full of begonias, the bees won't be going to that as much as they would be going to your helenium or daisies or crocosmia or. So that's quite important to bear in mind. I know it's a huge market and people do love their wow of colour in the summertime, but I do try and steer my clients towards maybe a little bit, let's tone it down a little bit and have a lovely mixture of grasses and perennials. And the great thing is obviously that they come back every year. You don't have to go out and spend more money every single year to buy new bedding plants, which are only going to end up in the compost heap. Yeah, that's what I would say. And also, when you're going for the perennials or the shrubs, trying to go from the more simple flowers, the open flowers or the stamens are very evident, to make it easier for the pollinators to get to the pollen and the nectar. And also, larval plants are important as well for the caterpillars. So it's just not all about colour. Pollinators need a wide range of vegetation in the garden.
Yeah, that's for sure. Butterflies and moths, a lot of them will seek out certain grasses and lay their eggs on them. So yeah, definitely, certainly when you're thinking about your lawn, people want to totally remove all the grass. Well, you want to weaken some of the grass, but you do want to have some grass in there.
You do, yes, it's important. Yes,
that's a good point.
There's Mr. Magpie behind us.
Oh, yeah.
and also having that access for as long as possible throughout the growing season. So you can start with your crocuses early spring. Snowdrops. Some bumblebees do go for the snowdrops, but apparently, and I didn't know this, daffodils and tulips are not great.
No,
I should have known that. But
no.
So I would encourage grape hyacinths, for instance, open snowdrops, with the open flower for the bumblebees. Crocuses are very important. So very early in the season. Mahonia, flowers in winter. Viburnum tinus, for instance, provides flower.
And interesting, we're finding that a lot of the bumblebee species that would normally go in and hibernate over the winter, so things like the buff-tailed bumblebee, they're because of climate change, they're actually carrying on through the winter in the warmer parts of the country. So they're actually starting to, instead of going in and nesting underground or in a wee hole, whatever, they're actually starting to have a second brood. So having that food source during the winter, or certainly very early springs, or from February and March onwards, when the queens are emerging or they've stayed through the winter, it's really important. So it's extending that season, isn't it?
Yes.
For a food source. Yeah. And that's where gardens are really important, isn't it? Because there's more available in the gardens than what's out in nature.
Absolutely, that's right. Yes, we can manage that space with wildlife in mind.
So that was Lynn and Jean down in Ayrshire talking a little bit about gardening for wildlife. And this is, I think, one of my favourite features from the whole series. I think wildlife gardening is quite often talked about as something we can all do, but it's just brilliant to hear from Lynn and Jean, and they both are absolute experts and also make things really accessible. So a huge thank you to them for featuring. How was the recording down in Ayrshire, Rachel?
Yeah, it's so nice. I mean, Jean's garden is really fantastic. And it was such a little haven. I mean, Jean kind of says it herself, what she loves about her garden is that it's a haven for wildlife, but also for her and her family. And it's just such a little kind of calming pocket. But it's also not, it's not a large garden. It's, really kind of standard. And she's just done it in such an amazing way. Just the way she's laid it out. And it's like, you've just got all these little like hidden nooks kind of in the garden where you can sit and relax. So the way she's done it's fantastic. And of course, as we kind of heard in the segment, it's very popular with the local wildlife. So it was fantastic. It was, a nice little walk around. And I went home with so many ideas.
So what are you going to be doing in your outdoor space?
I know. Well, the thing is, so I've just moved. And so we are in like a tenement flat that's got a communal garden. But, there's still plenty of things that we're going to be able to do. So it is, at the moment, currently fairly slabbed. So my plan is just to start getting some, plants in there. I think we'll start off with some pots, some pollinator-friendly stuff. But my aim is in a few years' time, it's a little bit of a haven in itself.
Nice.
What about you, Ed?
Well, I always feel quite overwhelmed because I think we talk a lot about wildlife gardening and I think I always end up with a list as long as my arm of jobs and things that I should or could be doing in my garden. So actually something I'm trying to get better at is actually just spending time out there and enjoying the wildlife that does visit. And I find for me that works as a really good motivator. So particularly in summer, we've got some patches of long grass that we don't cut. I love to go and sit out there and watch all of the different insects that visit, and there'll be spiders and grasshoppers and crickets and all sorts of stuff. Bees, hoverflies, wasps, all sorts of things kind of buzzing around. So I'm trying to get better at enjoying the garden as a place for wildlife and using that as a motivator. So it's not really kind of a tangible task, but it's just a kind of little thing that helps me feel more motivated to do those tasks. So that's something I think was a real takeaway from Lynn and Jean's feature, that enjoying your garden is really, really important, or your outdoor space. You don't have to have a massive garden, as we've said, but just get out there and enjoy it, and that will help you kind of be more motivated to do stuff. So it's a lovely notion there from the two of them. But
yeah, 100%. That can be your New Year's resolution.
Maybe
Spend
it should
more time
be
in the garden.
That's it. Get out in the garden more.
Exactly. And what Lynn and Jean were talking about is, you can just leave little pockets and nature will do its thing. So even if it's just like a little kind of corner in the back of your garden, just leave it wild and see what happens, see who visits, and just, like you say, spend time out there. And, nature will do its own thing.
For sure. So for our third feature, we have got a special guest, as we mentioned in the previous episode. We are very, very excited about this. Do you want to tell everyone who we're talking to, Rachel?
Oh, I get the honour. Yeah, so we're really excited to be joined by Laura Anderson, aka Less Waste Laura. Laura is an award-winning climate activist. She's an environmental scientist and an ethical influencer. And she was also previously one of our Scottish Rather Trust Young Leaders, who we heard from Johnny in this season as well. And Laura was also featured on our season 1 of the podcast a couple of times. So it's great to be back with Laura to hear about all the amazing work she does. Over to Laura. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to have you back with us, because you did feature, I think, twice on our first season.
Yeah.
For some of the storytelling sessions. So yeah, it's great to have you back. I thought it'd be nice to kick off. So obviously you've got, a growing kind of following on social media and gaining really, really great traction. So it'd be great to hear, I guess, just where did it all start? How did it all begin?
I mean, it was a complete accident. Well, not an accident, but it definitely didn't start with the intention of becoming any sort of platform or any sort of, I guess, job or anything like that. And it all started because I went after school to university. That's the path that I decided to go down. And I went and studied geography and environmental science. And I just loved it. Like, I loved learning about the world. I loved learning about how things were formed and how things worked. And it was just so fascinating. But when you learn about that stuff, you also learn the really negative stuff, climate change, biodiversity loss, just in general, all the impacts that we're having by building cities or traveling or consumption. And it felt kind of a bit overwhelming at times, because you just thought, oh my goodness, like, what on earth are we going to do about all of this? And I always knew that my job was probably going to be something in the sustainability space. That's obviously very broad. But I thought it would actually be helpful to take on some of this myself as well, even just as kind of lifestyle action. And when I was in my final year, so the calendar for university, it goes from the September through to the next year, and you normally end around May, June time. And so I was in my final year, and it was quite a daunting thought, because I was like, I have no idea what job I'm going to do afterwards. I'm not really sure what career I'm going to have. And I was just kind of a bit worried about what the rest of the kind of final year was going to look like. And I was away on a New Year's trip. So this was back in 2018, literally the 1st of January. And everyone was talking about, their plans for the year. And I was like, I have none. I don't know what I'm going to be doing after uni. And it was quite daunting. But it was on that day that I decided, well, why don't I just pick a fun, New Year's resolution, something to just carry me through the year, because that'll be something that I can focus on. And it was on that walk. It was actually the east coast of Scotland, a place called Ely in Fife. And we were on this lovely walk. It was a beautiful sunny day. And we were talking about the year ahead and challenges and all this stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm going to set myself one. And as we were on this walk, there was just so much rubbish on the beach. And it was really hard to be in that space of trying to think about your dreams and what you want to do that year. And you're constantly seeing crisp packets and plastic bottles and fishing gear, and just thinking this is not the nice things that you want to be looking at in the start of a new year. So that's when I decided, okay, 2018, my New Year's resolution is going to be more sustainable, to try and, lifestyle habit wise, make a positive impact. And really quickly, I realized a lot of people were also interested. This is off the back of things like Blue Planet. You know, people were really starting to think about, in particular, their plastic and their waste and their consumption. And so as I was doing my little New Year's resolution, I was encouraged to kind of document it. And so in January, I decided to start an Instagram and called it Less Waste Laura, because that was, I guess, what I was just trying to do throughout the year. And that was obviously back in 2018. And since then, it's grown from, if anyone was bored enough and wanted to scroll back to the beginning, it was like, this is a bamboo toothbrush. It helps me save plastic. Or this is a bar of shampoo. I don't have to buy a plastic bottle. It really was kind of like tips and tricks at the beginning. And now it obviously is a place for campaigning. It's a place for sharing like educational stuff. You know, I'm very privileged to have gone to uni and learned all that. So like, how can I share that with other people? But that is genuinely how it all started, was just like, I should document this fun New Year's resolution because people are interested. And then it just kind of grew from there into what it is now. And obviously it's on other platforms, it's across different social media things, and it's, turned into a wee bit of a job as well, which is quite fun.
That's so much fun. I love the idea that, it's come from a New Year's resolution to, like you say, a job. And most people, might give up chocolate or something for a New Year's resolution. You're like saving the world.
Would have been easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no small task, I think, you've set yourself. You've obviously, it's led you to do loads of really, really interesting stuff. You fairly recently got back from COP30 in Brazil. Have you got any kind of highlights from, since 2018 to now? What are the kind of highlights for you?
I think there's loads. I mean, sometimes the great thing about social media is you just get invited to really cool things, and they aren't always big events. Obviously, the United Nations conferences, when you get the chance to go to things of that scale, it's obviously incredible. But there's also just really lovely people that will send you messages and say, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but we're a little local community litter picking group and we'd love to have you round and like come join us. And you get to meet these like incredible people, and you just get connected. And even I've recently moved house and I've also moved town. So I now live somewhere completely different. And it was just lovely that people got in touch and said, oh, we noticed that you've moved and like we're local. And if you need some new friends, which is always lovely when you've just moved somewhere. But I would say there's a few kind of highlights that stand out. In 2019, I actually did a TEDx talk in Glasgow, and that was incredible because at those events, I think there was like 3,000 people in the Glasgow Armadillo, and they weren't all there to hear about sustainability. They were there to hear from lots of different speakers on lots of different topics, but it was great that I got their attention for, very specifically, it was 8 minutes. That was my slot, 8 minutes. So I got to speak to them all about, sustainability in a setting of people that maybe wouldn't have normally been interested. I've been invited to some really cool places as well. I've been invited into Holyrood and into Westminster to meet with politicians, and often it's because they've probably seen you on social media, but then you actually get to go and pester them about the things that you would like to see change, which I think is always really great. So this year I was down in Downing Street and, got to meet Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband. And in terms of the kind of environmental space, those are obviously incredibly influential people to get to meet. And then you get to sort of be in their ear about the things that you would like to see change. So you get these really cool opportunities, but they're not always the big fancy ones. Often it is just like connecting in with what's happening locally. And I know for me, especially having moved, that was like such a special thing for people to reach out and say, we've spotted that I'm now in Ayrshire, and like, oh, would you like to come and join these groups that we've got going on? And that's always just something so lovely.
We've talked a lot over the course of this series about some of the challenges that Scotland's wildlife and nature is facing. But how do you personally kind of stay positive and motivated to keep talking about the problems and the solutions? Because it can get quite overwhelming.
Totally. I think you go in swings and roundabouts, and some days I wake up and think, oh, I feel really positive about everything today, and you can see lots of things happening. And then there's other days where, of course, whether it's research gets dropped or, there's a story in the news and you just think, oh my goodness, I did not. Recently there was, I think it was the Royal Horticultural Society did some research on how many people are paving over gardens, and it was just shocking. And obviously on a day like that, you do despair and you just think, where do we go from here? But of course there's lots of days where there's really positive stories about the number of, is it a bird species or is it an insect that there's maybe a positive news story. So I think it's about seeking those out. But I would say, and it's interesting, you mentioned that I'd just come back from COP30. So I've been to all of the COPs since Glasgow. So COP26, which was in 2021, we hosted that in Glasgow. And I would say that every year when I come back, I am just reminded that the change is going to come from the ground up. Every single year, that's just my biggest takeaway is multilateralism is so important. We need to keep it and we need to work at it. We absolutely have to have these conferences and we need to make the best out of it that we can. But the biggest change is going to come from communities who just get together and decide to do things about whether it's nature or climate or literally any other topic. And so one of the things I like to do is just get involved with stuff locally and actually just say, let's try and solve this problem. And so tiny examples, but when I moved to Ayrshire, one of the things that me and led really by the local litter picking team who were already here and doing amazing work, is we managed to get a little beach toy library. So it's this little wooden box that sits on the beach, and once kids have used their buckets and spades or whatever, they can go and put it in there and it saves stuff along the beach and any kids can go and take stuff. And that was because really any time there's a bank holiday or the summer or whatever, you get tons of people coming down to the beach. They buy buckets and spades and all sorts just for the day, and then they chuck them away or they leave them behind. And we thought, here's a small little tiny thing that we can do to save people having to buy loads of plastic. Also, it just means that people can take it somewhere so that it can get reused instead of thrown away. And that was the smallest little action, but actually it had a huge impact locally on the beach next to where I live. And that was a small, tiny thing that actually was really positive, and it ended up actually making the news. And you're like, wow, isn't that so lovely that a good news story can happen? And I've seen there's other stuff as well, whether it's schools getting involved in tree planting or local communities doing, different habitat restoration projects. That's the kind of stuff that I think reminds you about the positivity. It keeps you hopeful, but also that is where the change is going to happen, right? That's the scale that it's going to happen at. It's pockets of different groups doing things. So I think that's how I always try and do it, is find the positive stories. Don't shy away from the scary ones, but find the positive ones as well, but also just put your worries into action. Actually say, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Let's just go. And I think, for people who maybe have never done anything like that, I think they'll be surprised at the difference it can make.
That's so great. That's a really fantastic take on it, I think. Like you kind of said earlier, we just need more folk doing little things and not thinking, oh, someone else will do it, it's up to someone else. And then I think, there's a lot of power in doing something like that ourselves for that kind of positivity, for sure. I guess that's kind of, it feeds really nice into the next question we're going to ask. Social media, obviously it plays a big part in your activism, but it also plays, a really big part in all our lives and kind of where we just find out about all this stuff. And it can definitely be an overwhelming place, and I think we can all agree with that. So how would you say, Laura, that you manage, that kind of intensity that is social media?
I know, and honestly, it's such a philosophical question, is social media a net positive or a net negative on society, right? Because there's so much good and there's so much bad, and it's just so difficult to separate out the two. And I have friends who are completely not on social media. I've got friends who love it and are on it all the time, and there's no simple answer. For me, it's definitely been a net positive on all the work that I've tried to do and the connections that I've made and the change that we've managed to get. But obviously with that, there comes, ways of being able to manage it well. So, for me personally, it's about setting boundaries. I recently, this year, put those sort of time limiters on your phone so that it actually pops up. You've now spent, I've set them to an hour, which actually I feel is quite short, but quite quickly sometimes it'll come up and say, right, you've reached your time limit. And some days, of course, I just ignore it and go back on, but most times I'm like, okay, that's good, that's clocked how long I've spent on it, and gonna switch it off now, and that's the time gone. I think also I just try and treat it a bit like it is part of my job. So keep it within the 9 to 5, try and make sure that I'm not scrolling endlessly every hour of the night, unless it's what I want to do, right? Some of us just enjoy it, but try and set some boundaries there. But I think often I also think, well, what's my role, right? So my role is also about trying to use it for good and trying to share positive stories. There's always a time that you do need to be a bit more angry and a bit more, come on, let's get this campaign win, like let's raise awareness for this issue. But overall, I also try and share solutions and try and say, actually, there's lots of solutions out there to these problems. There's lots of positivity, and try and use it that way. But I've certainly found it to just be an amazing connector and networker. And maybe it's like being from Scotland, you sometimes have that feeling of like, oh, are we missing out on the things that are happening in London or in America, or, are there all these things happening? But you forget that social media is a great way to connect you in with what's happening all around the world, whether that's organizations that are doing great work or just individuals that you want to connect with. So I've found it to be fantastic. And also just like an education platform. I think social media has shifted in the last few years from being a place to just follow along with friends and family to now a place of education. And I think I see my role as being a bit of an educator and actually sharing about the work that I do. And I just love when people are like, thank you so much for explaining this to me. I've never heard it this way. Or, and there's lots of people that didn't learn this stuff at school, and just a great way for them to be able to see it and experience it. And I think that's probably one of the most positive things that I get out of social media now. But of course, it comes with its barriers, and you need to make sure you set good boundaries. And of course, there's times where I'll read something and get upset, and then I'm like, oh, right, okay, I'll just take myself away now for a day. But overall, I think it's something that we definitely need to work with. And I am always trying to encourage other people to get on it, because I also think the more good people that are putting good content out, the better. So I'm always trying to encourage people. And that's something I'm trying a lot with my science hat on. I'm an academic. I work in a couple of different universities, and I'm really trying to get researchers to get on more. It's not always an easy task, but I'm trying to encourage them.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point, I think. So I a lot of my work with the Trust is looking after the Trust social media, and it can be a really challenging place to be sometimes, but I think it's also really, really important. Like you say, there's positives and those kind of negatives to it as well. And it's finding that line of sharing what we're doing, the good stuff, talking about some of the really exciting things that we've got going on, shining a light on some of the fantastic wildlife that we've got on our reserves and all that kind of stuff. And as well as connecting with people who are out there, communities, and all those fantastic people who are doing fantastic stuff. So it can be a kind of tricky line, but I think, that's a good bit of advice to find those boundaries. So the next question is about kind of going back to some of the threats and the climate crisis and the biodiversity crises. What would you say to people who feel kind of frustrated and upset at the twin biodiversity and climate crises, but aren't really sure about what to do?
I mean, it's such a good question, and I think lots of people wrestle with it. And I would actually say that the vast, vast, vast majority of people agree on the sort of climate, nature, science. They agree that there's bad stuff happening and that we need to do something about it. But as soon as you enter into what's the solution, the water can actually get quite murky, because depending on who you talk to, people have got different ideas about the solutions for energy, the solutions for farming, the solutions for land reform. People have lots of different ideas, and it can actually be quite hard to navigate, well, what is the right answer? Like, do we want wind farms? Do we want solar farms? Do we want pylons? Do we want big farming, small farming? Like, it does become quite complex. I mean, I think one of the best things I can encourage people to do is find groups that are also kind of thinking about these issues. Obviously, the Trust has lots of local groups and lots of even online events, but like, join them, because there's lots of people wrestling with these very same questions. And I think, even though I've just said social media is fantastic and is amazing, actually being able to go to like events and groups can be really helpful to take your questions to. So that is absolutely something that I would say is important. But I also think it's also about engaging with those who can make a difference at maybe a bigger scale. And I feel like I bang on about it all the time, but I actually don't think people hear it that often, but it is just that reminder to go and speak to your representatives. So in Scotland, we've got local councillors, we've got members of the Scottish Parliament who are a lot to do with the environment, but we also have members of Parliament down south. And I would say that is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do, is get in touch with them. And you don't always have to get in touch with them with an ask or a demand. You can actually just simply get in touch with them and say, hello, I am your constituent, and I just wanted to let you know that I am really passionate about this issue. I really love these natural spaces that we've got in our constituency, or I went to this event and I found it so fascinating, and I just wanted to let you know and encourage you that like these are important things to me as a constituent. Obviously, you might then have a great ask that you want them to do, you know, whether it's to sign up to something or come to something or be a champion for something. But I think one of the most positive things we can do, and something that's a great starting point, is actually just getting in touch with them and saying, this is something that I think is important. And I think also just having conversations with like local businesses as well about, here's something that I'm quite passionate about, or I'm just curious, why is it that you use this product or you do your service in this way? Or, you know, even just encouraging them if there's local initiatives happening, like how could you maybe support us or support it? But yeah, I think there's lots of different things we could be doing. And some of it is about education, like educating ourselves and trying to figure that out. And some of that is about, you know, going beyond ourselves to those who represent us and try to encourage it. And I would also say this is partly what I'm researching for my PhD, but I'm looking at community engagement. So also like get stuck in to the community engagement stuff that might be going on near you. There's always opportunities. They're not always easy to find. I know that is a problem, but like any chance you get, do turn up to things and just have those conversations.
Nice. What a brilliant answer and a fantastic point to end on. So thank you, Laura. It's been really brilliant chatting.
Thank you for having me on.
So that was Laura Anderson, better known as Less Waste Laura. A huge thank you to Laura for jumping on and chatting. Again, she featured in season 1 as one of our young leaders, but it was fantastic to have Laura back. I always enjoy talking to Laura because she's so down to earth and has such just kind of infectious ambitions and goals. And I always feel really positive after talking to Laura. So again, a huge thank you to Laura for jumping on the podcast there.
Yeah, definitely. Incredibly inspiring. And like you say, you always come away just feeling more ambitious, I think. And I always come away thinking, oh, what could I do better? Right, I'll do that. Laura mentioned this, I'll try this. You know, she's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't follow her on social media, definitely do. And yeah, she's got all the tips and tricks for us to be a little bit more environmentally friendly.
So this is, as you probably know, this is the 6th episode in our 2nd season of Words of the Wild, which means it's the last episode of season 2. I'm not really sure where that time's gone. 6 episodes have flown by. It's been tons of fun. We really, really hope you've enjoyed listening. As always, an enormous thank you to everyone who has been involved, not just our speakers, but to all the people behind the scenes as well, who are involved kind of here at the Trust and in our partner organisations, because there's a lot of people that put a lot of work into this. So a huge thank you to them as well.
And a huge thank you to everyone that has been listening along the way and following us on this journey. And don't forget, if you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything like that, you can get in touch with us at communications@scottishwildlifetrust.org.uk. We are always keen to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes, as Rachel says, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Comments, questions, thoughts maybe for a 3rd season, things you might like to hear about going forwards. We'll see what happens. But thank you very much for listening. This has been Words of the Wild.